Uh, my name is Joel Obermeyer. I'm the executive director of Widen the Circle. I'm super excited to have all of you here today to listen to somebody who I really find both captivating as a person and the work that she does. So thank you for joining us for this conversation with Ashley Rogers of the Whitney Whitney Plantation. I know how to say those things correctly, I think. In a few minutes, Ashley will take us on a tour of a remarkable historic site and reflect on what it means to be doing this work right now. Before we do that, though, let me just talk very briefly about Widen the Circle. I'll keep this nice and short. I think the majority of people who are in this event know a little bit about us. So I'll just say, a war on memory is going on in this country and in Germany. And when you think about it, it has really reached a kind of a fever pitch this year. And when you manipulate or erase a group's history, what you're really saying is that group does not belong in society, that group doesn't matter. And really, it's a recipe for injustice. And Widen the Circle pushes back on this. We work with remembrance activists. These are people who deal with history and memory on a grassroots level, engage with communities and community members, and they use history and memory to make change happen now. Widen the Circle as an organization, we empower these remembrance activists in the United States and Germany, and they confront long-standing injustice rooted in racism, anti-Semitism, and attacks on democratic values, and use the lessons of history to promote healing. We have 3 program areas. We have a network of remembrance activists, more than 400 people doing amazing work in Germany. We have an awards program, the Obermeyer Awards, that honors these same remembrance activists in Germany. And we also have a fellowship program, which is why we're talking today. It's a fellowship that connects people doing this kind of work, remembrance activists in the United States, to one another and to people doing this work in Germany. And we are building a network in the US very similar to what we have in Germany as well. And these are people who are working on projects like the history of the Underground Railroad, or perhaps a site like the memory project at the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, where there was a massacre in, I think I've got 2018, I think I've got that right. And of course, the work that Ashley Rogers is doing. The fellowship is a year-long program anchored by an immersive educational experience in Germany. It's followed by a set of experiences that turn the fellows into a sort of brain trust. They help one another, make progress, collaborate, and also gain inspiration. Okay, I think that is enough about what we do. I'm very eager to get to Ashley. So Ashley, we're going to give a little bit of background on Ashley. Ashley Rogers is the founding director of the Whitney Plantation, a site of memory in southern Louisiana, about an hour from New Orleans. Its mission is to educate the public about the history and legacies of slavery in the United States. Plantation sites and plantation museums typically showcase the lives of the wealthy slave owners. At the Whitney, the narrative is told from the perspectives of the enslaved people who lived and died there. The art and memorials are dedicated to them, and the exhibits ask visitors to understand the lives of enslaved people and the wider context of slavery. Since opening in 2014, the Whitney has welcomed more than 700,000 visitors. Ashley has led the museum since its founding. She's also a scholar, recently completing her PhD in history at Louisiana State University, and she is an advocate for social justice and equity in the museum field. Ashley, welcome.
Thank you.
We're very excited to have you. And what I thought we could start talking about is your path into this work. You
Mhm.
grew up in North Carolina. Your mother worked in living history museums. And I know it'd be great if you could just explain what that is and what she did and kind of how it influenced you.
Yeah. So living history is people have maybe been to this type of museum. It's like, people are in costume. In this case, it was a farm. There were like sheep and horses there. We had fields to tend to. My mom was one of the cooks. This was at a Lincoln family site in Illinois. And then
Sure.
she continued doing that as a freelancer. So she just took me with her, probably for childcare reasons. And then that just kind of, set me off on this path. I was telling you, a week ago or whatever, that one of my earliest memories is being an exhibit in the museum. So like she put me down for a nap in a crib and there's visitors like walking over me, looking down on me. I was 2 years old. So this has been in the family.
Wow. Uh, okay. So maybe you can also talk to me a little bit. As I understand it, when you were 10, you were also reading slave narratives on your own, like on your own, because you wanted to. Can you
Mhm.
talk about what drew you to them and how did this field, we get a little bit of origin here, but how did this field become a calling for you?
Well, also my mom started reading me history books when I was a kid. I mean, there was no like amount of normal books. We were reading Dickens when I was 5. So like this was the story, right? And I think it was a little bit natural. And I also had a lot of really influential Black teachers in elementary school who like assigned, they made assignments of some of these things. And then, I got interested in that on my own. One of my first memories of that feeling of like staying up really late because you can't put a book down was reading Celia a Slave when I was in 5th grade. And so it was something that I just was always really captivated by. And also because a lot of these, I grew up in the South, I grew up in North Carolina, reading Harriet Jacobs when I was a kid. Like that was in my backyard. Harriet Jacobs was in Edenton, North Carolina. That's like maybe a 2-hour drive from where I grew up. So a lot of these stories were also local.
Yeah, so they feel very present.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so that's kind of, in a way, where some of your earliest impulses came from.
Hmm.
Now I'm hoping you can talk to me a little bit of how you got to the Whitney, because I feel like that's kind of a striking story. You were working as an assistant director at a house museum in Denver, and
Hmm.
you heard that a plantation in Louisiana was about to open, and you didn't wait, as I understand it, you didn't wait for a job posting. Yeah, so just briefly, tell us what you did. How did
I
this happen?
was, I was living in Colorado for a number of years and I was interested in moving back to the South. My husband at the time and I were actively looking for a way to get back. And he had gotten a job in New Orleans, and we were going to have to move to New Orleans anyway. So we were already kind of looking, found out that this place was opening. And I had said, like, out loud to people 2 years before, I want to move back to the South. I want to work in a plantation museum interpreting slavery. But like, that wasn't a thing that existed. So I found out that this place was going to open, and I just wrote a cold email to the like whatever email address we could find connected. It turned out to be like the general address of a law firm where the founder used to run the law firm. And I just listed, I was like, this is everything I know how to do in a museum. What do you need? And I was kind of figuring, to be honest with you, I thought they've got this place fully staffed. I will volunteer sometimes while I get, some little job in New Orleans to kind of
Sure.
try to get in. And I ended up meeting with the founder. Um, came down to New Orleans, flew in at night. The next morning by 10 a.m., had a house under contract. The next day, met with the founder. And by the end of the day, found out that there was a job that they were advertising. And so kind of the rest is history. But it was definitely something where I just approached it without any prior
And as
prompting.
I understand it, they hired you and you had about 3 months to open the museum.
Yeah. So yeah, this was a wild miscalculation on my part. So I figured, they're a few months from opening. They've got this place fully staffed. Like I got hired. It was like Labor Day weekend was when I started, and we were supposed to open on November 15th. And on our first meeting, we pushed back the opening by 3 weeks. So I basically had from Labor Day, like around in September until December 7th to do everything. Because I found out that there was no staff, there was no tour script written, the permanent exhibit wasn't done, there wasn't a front desk. They hadn't done hours of operation. They had vendor contracts. I mean, I did all of that. Fortunately, I had a lot of experience doing some of that stuff. But it was basically me and our research director who's still with us, and he had just come on full time. So the two of us kind of, he's an academic historian, which is sort of a different skill set. So I had to take all that research he had done and then figure out a way to translate it to the public, which is the work of public history. This is like, how do you make something that's
Yeah.
inaccessible accessible?
And so you
So
did all that in 3 months, more or less.
yeah, yeah,
Wow. All
yeah.
right. And as I understand it, the opening, you had something like 750 people?
Mhm. Yeah, we had 750 people at the opening. And I worked without ceasing for 3 months. And then on day one, I got the flu from just
Okay.
going so hard.
Okay. So I would like to now turn toward the Whitney itself,
Mhm.
because I'm going to guess the majority of people on this call have never been there. They heard the description and so on, and I'm hoping that you could walk us through, just a sense of what the place is like and what a visit might entail.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that your slides, or actually, it's your presentation shows okay.
Yes. I practiced this, so we're gonna works. But hopefully you can see this.
I can see it well. Rebecca, can you give me a thumbs up? Yes, it's good. Okay, go for it.
So this is I always like to start a presentation with this just because this drone captures kind of the length of the property. You can see the historical sugarcane fields off in the back, and there's a memorial right in front. But we have about 200 acres, 13 original buildings. And where this video starts is the Antioch Church, which is not original to our property, but it was brought in and it was a freedmen's church. So a church founded for freed people after the Civil War.
And I just
Uh,
want to confirm that the plantation was actually in operation from the 1700s until the 1900s. Did I understand that right?
yeah, from 1752 until 1975.
Wow. Okay.
That was an operation.
Great.
Um,
And then can we talk a little bit about what happens to visitors before they kind of, or as they get ready to start their tour?
Yeah, so we do guided and self-guided tours of the site. We also do a lot of special programming. Um, but the site is unusual in the fact that we have not only the historical buildings, but also a series of memorials that we built on the site to name and honor people who were enslaved there, as well as monumental works of art throughout. So some of what you're seeing here, this is the Children of Whitney series, which was by Woodrow Nash, who's an artist out of Akron, Ohio. So we have artwork throughout the grounds, we have memorials throughout the grounds. So it's really a fundamentally different type of plantation tour experience, which was really owing to the vision of our founder, John Cummings, as well as Ibrahim Asek, our research director, who comes from the kind of French memory tradition. He's Senegalese. And so that's kind of his background. And so that becomes really apparent throughout the visit.
Yeah, that's okay. No worries. No worries.
The
Can I
mailman
just,
is here.
so one of the things I understand is that generally speaking, visitors are given a lanyard that has a relationship to us. Anyway, tell us what that's all about.
Yeah, the founder had this idea. He was inspired by the Holocaust Museum in DC. So there's a when you go in, everybody gets a lanyard that has one of these Children of Whitney statues on it, and it has a quote from the Works Progress Administration slave narratives from Louisiana on the back. So there's just like a quote from an interview of a person who was enslaved in Louisiana. Um, the difference is, and this is kind of the trouble of researching slavery. My understanding is that you find out what happens to your person at the Holocaust Museum. A lot of people come expecting that. They think that they're going to find out what happened to their person. And some of what we have to kind of explain is like, we don't know what happened to that person
Yeah,
either. There's so few records with regard to enslaved people that
got
sometimes
it.
all you have is just one snippet.
But my understanding is like having a person having that quote and so on as a way of connecting with an individual as opposed to just kind of the general.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
The quotes are used throughout the memorials as well.
got it, got it.
Mhm.
Okay, and so we again, Children of the Whitney. You said the sort of the 40 terracotta sculptures
Mhm.
um, in this. Again, this was a church that was Freedman's church that was moved there.
Mhm.
Great. Okay,
Yeah.
let's keep going.
Um, yeah. So this is kind of our flagship memorial. This is called the Wall of Honor, which records the names of people who were enslaved at Whitney. And this is one that we're currently working on. I've got a grant last year, so we're redoing this memorial. So this is my first chance to put my Widen the Circle lessons into action.
Excellent. Excellent. We like
I'm
to hear
building a
that.
memorial after studying memorials. So um, we're kind of changing the process on this, and right now the problem is that this does not have the names of everyone enslaved at Whitney. We have at least 200 additional people to add to this wall.
Right. And it started out with 350, and then you have 200 additional names, you said.
Yeah, we're
Yep.
up to almost 600 now.
Oh,
So
wow.
um, yeah, so we have quite a number, and I started making contact with descendants who I'm going to put together on a little panel. So once we get kind of our data in order, to consult with descendants about how to show names and how to um, how to display things, and then how to like release some of the data that we have, because we want this to be not only a memorial for people, but potentially for there to be an online component that could be actually useful for descendants to find their ancestors.
And my understanding is that some of your ideas behind this came from the fellowship around things that are often things that you discussed there about like who's the memorial for.
Yes. Yes. I had a lot of thinking to do about memorials after visiting Germany. And there was a lot of elements, the different memorials that we saw. I thought a lot about who they were for and whether the point of the memorial was to inspire um, guilt, whether it was meant to inspire pride. There's lots of different things that a memorial might evoke, right?
Right.
I think that the ones that we saw in Germany kind of run the gamut. There's all kinds of different things, but I was given an opportunity to think about how some of the information might hit someone differently if they are a part of the group that's being memorialized, which
You
is
mean
why,
like a descendant of somebody who had been enslaved there?
yeah, which is
Yeah.
why I want there to be actual descendants of these people consulting us on this process.
Got it. Got it. Great. Okay.
This is another of our memorials, and this one is called the Field of Angels. This is just for children who were enslaved in St. John the Baptist Parish, and these are records that are from the church. So the Catholic Church, the Archdiocese, holds records of births and deaths for enslaved people, and the statue in the center is by a Mississippi artist named Rod Moorhead. It's called Coming Home, and it was commissioned for Whitney.
And you said this is for children.
Mhm.
And is there some reason why you had to go to the Catholic Church for these records?
The Catholic Church is where births and deaths were recorded for those enslaved people who were Catholic. It's not actually everyone, because not everyone was baptized, but if they were baptized, then their death would also be recorded by the church. So
Right.
if they were members of the church, and enslaved people were allowed to be members of the Catholic Church, which was just up the road.
Got it. And my understanding is that the um, I don't know, the rate of children dying from disease and malnourishment and so on among the enslaved population was very high. And that's
Yeah.
sort of one of the things that's emphasized here. Anyway, tell us a little bit.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, it's kind of hard to, this memorial, again, like what's a memorial for? I don't think this memorial can effectively teach you that, because you're not understanding the scale or comparisons.
Hmm.
But it is true that in Louisiana is the only area in the United States that had a net negative growth in the population of enslaved people, specifically the sugar region. So Whitney Plantation is in St. John the Baptist Parish, Louisiana. In Louisiana, we have parishes, not counties, because
Yeah,
of the predominance of the Catholic Church. And in everywhere where sugar was grown, there was a negative birth rate worldwide. And so in the United States, there's very few areas where sugar was grown, South Louisiana being really the only one during the time of slavery. And there was a negative birth rate. So there were more people dying than being born,
yeah,
which has a lot to do with the climate, to be honest. I mean, just where sugar grows. There's a lot of mosquitoes, so a lot of mosquito borne illness. And then a lot of it has to do also with the harsh nature of the labor as well as demographic imbalance. So more
Okay.
men on plantations than women, leading to fewer births.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Maybe let's keep going.
Yeah. So this is one of the original cabins. There are only two slave cabins that are remaining on the property, but there were 22 at one time. Most of those were torn down. Over the course of the 20th century, the size of the workforce drastically reduced because of the predominance of machine labor.
Right.
So when they didn't have people anymore, they would tear down the cabins because they were just sitting vacant. And then we have a few of these statues. Most of the statues by Woodrow Nash are in clay, so they can't be outside because they deteriorate. But these are bronze. So we have a few throughout the property that are done in bronze, and those are that's what's seen here
Can
on.
I ask you, by having this dwelling there and having people, I assume, being able to see it and inside of it, what are you trying to convey to them? What do you want people to come out with?
Well, I mean, first
I'm
and
sorry.
foremost,
What do you? Okay, hold on one second. Louder. What do you want people to come out with?
um, I mean, first and foremost, we're a historic site. So kind of the main point of the visit is to see, the buildings of the plantation and how people lived. Um, so, this is a space where we talk about everyday life of enslaved people, you know, the community, family relationships, all kinds of things that help them understand, kind of everyday life.
Gotcha. Um, and then let's keep going from there.
Yeah, so and I think this is the last one that I put in here, but this is the big house. So this is the owner's house. This was built in about 1790, and it's a Creole style home, very typical of the French Caribbean. It's an architectural style that you see in other French Caribbean locations, but not really in other parts of the United States. Heavily influenced by African architecture as well. And we have another of Woodrow's statues in the center. As just an aside, we were hit by a Category 4 hurricane in 2021, which was pretty devastating to us. And I have a picture that we took of the damage where you can see tree branches down everywhere here on this view, but that statue didn't move at all.
Oh wow.
It's really remarkable.
Wow.
None of the statues, they didn't look like they took any damage, and we had whole buildings collapse. So it was really surprising.
Now, my understanding, just like we just did, that if you were to do a tour at the Whitney, this would be the last place you come to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it depends. Actually, it
Or
used to be the last place. It's never the first. I'll say that. It's not the
okay,
first.
okay. So it's a later place you come to. Talk about what you're trying to do by not going to that place first.
Well, a typical plantation tour would only be the house. So we really kind of de-emphasize the house. The other thing is that a few years ago, I sold all of the furniture in the big house. So it's not furnished anymore. And it used to be. So that was also partly to try to kind of de-emphasize the house because people tend to focus on it too much. Um,
Gotcha.
and so, the point of the tour is really about the experience of enslaved people. And there were enslaved people inside of the big house. But we find that even if you try to make the narrative in that space about enslavement in the big house, that's not where people's brains are.
Mm.
They are heavily focused on the architecture, on any of, furniture inside, on the decor, and it's hard to make them stop.
So
So
it's almost like a distraction.
yeah, yeah. So we do the
Got
best we can to de-emphasize it.
Interesting. I would not have thought. I wouldn't have occurred to me, but it makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
Um, Actually, I want to continue from here, sort of
Hmm.
focusing a little bit more on what it takes your staff to run a place like the Whitney day in and day out. My understanding is interpreting. Great. Oh, interesting. Thanks, Dan. We'll get. And I should just say, anyone who has questions, feel free to put them in chat. We'll get to all of them toward the end. Although, since I saw this one, I'll give you this one. Was there any pushback when you sold all the furniture? Nobody in the community was upset or anything?
No, not
No.
really. But I mean, uh, some of my museum colleagues thought it was odd.
Yeah.
I'll
Okay.
say this, none of the furniture was original. This is the thing that I usually need to say in this conversation. If it were all original to the house, I don't know that I would have done it, to be honest with you.
Ah,
That would
gotcha.
have been a harder thing. In fact, there was only one piece that I know is original, and I kept it. Um, and so, which was a garde manger. Garde manger is a like a pie safe food, a food.
Okay.
It's not on display, but I still have it. Um, and yeah, I mean, nobody, the thing is, we were already not a typical plantation museum when we did that. So there was nobody really attached to a narrative about the plantation owners at Whitney.
Okay.
Our community, our immediate community, is also 95% African American, who are people who either don't want to come because they're not interested in coming to a plantation or know us quite well. You know what I mean? There's the community is kind of divided on that.
Sure.
So it's a kind of a different
And,
situation
and
for
and
us.
my understanding is there's a broad range of people who are descended from those who were enslaved on the plantation in the area.
Yeah. Yeah. That's everyone. There's nobody who lives in that community. Like people don't move there. You know what I mean? So people, like everyone who lives close to us is descended
Yep.
from Whitney or from a nearby plantation.
And I see a quick question from Kent Hirschfelder, which I can't help throw up now. He asks, do you have school groups and things like that who come to this place?
We do, but not a lot. School group visitation tends to be less than 3% of what we get annually.
Hmm.
So it's very marginal. We're talking about only a couple thousand school kids a year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Um, part, that is more to do with our location than anything else. It is difficult for people to get to us because we're an hour from any major city.
Gotcha.
So, like the local school will come, it's free for them. But the bus travel is difficult. And like New Orleans, a lot of schools, we are beyond the limit to how far they can go.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Let me just ask you, it seems like a hard, I understand the narrative that you're working through in the exhibits that you have and that kind of relate to the site. You have many interpretive staff who are giving tours and things like that. My understanding is that many of them are actually descendants themselves, and you're essentially interpreting this, I think, correctly as a site of trauma.
Mhm.
And I guess I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how difficult that is for your staff. What makes this difficult? The kinds of things that they might have to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that first of all, it's not for everyone. I have told my operations team that oversees the interpretive department that when they go to hire, they should overhire because people don't make it all the way through training. Like
Really?
I've never had a full class where everyone ended up being hired because some people get into it and it's too difficult. We had a woman who kept trying, she wanted to work there and she kept kind of coming back and trying to work there, but like it was too hard for her because it was bringing up too much stuff about her own family that she just wasn't, she didn't want to deal with, which is totally understandable. I think that like everyone who works there has to work through some level of racial trauma, either on a personal level or on a kind of societal level, thinking about like their place in society. I don't think there's anyone who's worked there who doesn't have to reckon with that at a certain point. And then if they are descendants, which many of our staff are, that might feel even different because it's not something that's theoretical or impersonal. It's literally your great grandfather, your great great grandfather, because again, people were there until 1975. So The woman who's our gift shop assistant, her grandfather was the last tractor driver at Whitney. So she came to visit Whitney as a child when
Oh,
he
wow.
still lived there.
Um, uh, and let me just ask one more thing. As I understand it, sometimes your visitors also contribute to this sense of difficulty of being in this situation based on the kind of questions they ask. And
Yeah.
I'm not trying to say negative things about visitors. It's more like there's a range of things you've got to be prepared to deal with.
Yeah, it's kind of all over the place. I mean, we get everyone. Most of the people who come to us are coming there on purpose because they want to be there. They're very sympathetic to what we do. I would say that like you're more likely to get kind of benign ignorance than actually anything malicious.
Right.
But people will, especially white visitors who are from an area where they don't interact with Black people ever, and now they've ended up on a plantation and they're talking to a Black person about slavery for the first time.
Yep.
That can be a difficult kind of interaction. We get people wanting to hug our interpreters and apologize for slavery, which is just you forget like they're at work. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
um and
Sure.
and saying things that are kind of that can range up to being very offensive, but on the most common side, asking things like, well, weren't there any good slave owners? This is a pretty common question that white
Right.
visitors ask. um because they get to a certain point in the tour and it's like they've never had to think about this before and they're really uncomfortable suddenly and they don't know what to do, and maybe they know that their ancestors owned enslaved people and nobody wants to think that their own ancestors were bad people. So if you grew up hearing, oh, but for us they were just like a member of the family, this is a thing that people hear in their own families all the
Mm,
time. And then you're hearing, oh no, there was persistent, pervasive violence, there was sexual violence, these were used as
right.
tools of oppression. And you're thinking, but not my great great grandfather, right? There
Right.
had to be some good ones. So that's an interaction that our interpreters have to kind of help people through.
And how do you respond to questions like that? I mean, maybe there isn't an easy response,
I
but
mean, yeah, everybody answers that in a different way. I mean, the thing that I try to help people understand is that it's impossible. It's an oxymoron. There is no such thing, right?
right.
Because even
Right.
if you have someone who never laid a hand on anyone and fed people well, like this isn't really the metric, right? Because those people who were enslaved didn't own their own bodies. So the point is that if he became financially insolvent, he could
Yeah.
separate all their families and sell them tomorrow if he wanted to, right? Basically, they are kept somewhere against their will. And I think that a lot of Americans misunderstand slavery fundamentally by thinking that slavery is a bad job. Slavery is a hard job, but that's
Yeah.
not what we're talking about. We're talking
Yeah.
about a group of people who are kept in a location against their will
Right. Who are
and
imprisoned.
then completely excluded from legal and civil society,
Yeah.
right?
That makes sense. I don't know that this analogy is perfect, but it makes me think a lot about how of the experience that I've had when you go to former Nazi concentration camp,
Mhm.
and obviously there's millions of differences, but just in terms of like the psychic place it plays
Mhm.
when you go to someplace like that, where you were there to connect to the trauma of people who were imprisoned there, and at least just from that one perspective, there is I feel like there's a bit of analogy to the Whitney, right? You're there to
Mhm.
connect with the suffering of the people who are there,
Yeah.
essentially.
You are, but this is the thing, and I think that it can be really instructive to compare the experience of visiting a plantation versus visiting a concentration camp. But the thing that makes that really difficult to
Sure.
understand is that concentration camps or labor camps in Europe were intended to kill people at a certain point, right?
Right.
The
Right.
point was extermination, which was fundamentally not the point of a plantation. It is
Sure.
to extract labor from people and at a certain level to keep them healthy enough to perpetuate the system
Sure.
for 200 years, right?
Sure.
The thing that makes it difficult, I think, for Americans to understand that comparison is this point where enslaved people built families, they built community, they had autonomous lives.
Right.
And we have to find a way to also study the joy and autonomy that enslaved people experienced amongst themselves within an oppressive structure. Um, so it's difficult, but I think that where it's most useful to think about it is from a, for lack of a better word, from a tourism perspective. Um, the
Okay.
experience of visiting these places, these sites of trauma, as a person who is looking and consuming it, and how do you behave? And I find that one big difference from my little limited experience is that Americans don't know how to act at a plantation because they have not been effectively communicated that it is a site of trauma. Because we
Uh,
put so much work into saying, no, it was fine, it was good, right? So they don't know how to interact with that space as a visitor. And we see that all the time.
and you're saying like that's not the kind of thing that was likely to happen at a concentration camp.
I mean, I'm sure that there are terrible people who visit
Yeah,
concentration
of course,
camps,
of course.
but I mean, we have to
Yeah,
deal regularly with people who show up and they're drinking a daiquiri because they're on vacation, or they start smoking cigarettes. We had a person crack open a beer in the Wall of Honor.
yeah,
Um, just kind of not really knowing how to engage, and that's not everybody, but I think that's like this juxtaposition of they're a tourist, they're on vacation, everything else they've done is like walk down Bourbon Street, take a swamp tour, look at an alligator, and then suddenly they're in this site of trauma. Like, how do you communicate
yeah, yeah,
difference
yeah,
in experience?
yeah, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. That would be a challenge. All right,
Mhm.
I want to turn to another theme now.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, um, uh, I was talking about the war of memory very briefly, and this is thinking about this war and memory issue was part of why I invited you here today. And I'll just say, starting a year and a half ago, things changed in terms of the responses you got to your work. That's
Mhm.
maybe a bit of a euphemism there. Uh, can you take us back to the moment when you realized the federal government was essentially targeting you guys? And other sites, of course.
Another, right.
Yeah, yeah, I realized it wasn't
Right.
just you.
Yeah, it's not just me.
No, no,
And
not at all.
yeah, no, I mean the very first stirrings of this happened in January of last year when they said that they were going to halt all grant payments from the federal government across the board. And I thought, oh no, they're coming for us. you
Right, and you
know,
had two grants at this point,
we
correct?
had
Oh,
three
three.
federal
Okay.
grants. Yeah. And and this is not a surprise because the agency, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, has been on the chopping block for a long time. Republicans hate the Institute of Museum and Library Services, even though it gets barely any funding. Um, and so I knew that they were going to come after us. And yeah, so a few things happened. Number one, as soon as Trump was elected, like as soon as he took office, we started to get like hate speech directed at us, which hadn't happened for a few years.
Really, and tell me, what do you mean by hate speech? You mean,
People calling up the museum and using the N word. I'm going to kill all of you N words,
oh, wow.
things that we
Okay.
had to report to police and like followed up on. And, ultimately found that like one of the people who was threatening us was probably like a 20-year-old kid who lived in Brooklyn, and didn't really, but it's hard to tell, as I've said many times since then, people who are essentially idiots, talk the same way as people who really intend to kill you.
Yeah,
So you can't tell the difference between those things. And so we have to take everything very seriously. Um,
yeah, that must have been scary.
yeah.
Yeah.
And especially for my staff, because they can feel very exposed there. So so that happened, and then of course, yeah, then our grants were taken away. We were nearly done with them. I was very swift. I got all of our money, and ultimately everything that was taken away, like there was just another ruling this week. Everything was deemed illegal, so court cases have sided in favor of the federal agencies. All of the grants from the Institute of Museum and Library Services had to be restored. And just this week, all of the funds that were cut from the National Endowment for Humanities, that was also ruled illegal. So
Yeah.
there's been a huge shift. Yeah.
But my understanding is basically you get a message from the federal government that says that you don't match their priorities anymore.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that they're going to try and cut off these grants,
Yeah.
even the people who work in the grant office. and you basically said, okay, let's get all of our invoices and everything in, and see
Yeah,
if
I
how much we
basically,
could get paid beforehand.
yeah, that's all I did for like 2 days straight. And then we put in our requests for funds to get everything finally paid out, which the only reason we were able to do that is because we were close to finishing.
Yeah,
These federal agencies work on a reimbursement basis, but the work was already pretty much done.
yeah, yeah.
So we were
No,
able to do that.
now, what you told me previously was basically that the threats and the messages and so on were in some ways much harder because
Mhm.
you sort of expected them to go after the money. You didn't necessarily expect that level of like really harsh, I don't know what to call them, but just attacks and threats. And I guess I was wondering how did you? I understand you reported what you needed to the police, but how did you
Yeah.
deal with this as a community essentially?
Yeah, I mean, the best I could do is just to be extremely responsive to this stuff and to be really transparent with my staff about what's happening. Because if they didn't hear anything, they thought nothing was happening. And, we also, because the police is aware, I now have that detective's phone number. He's on speed dial, so I can contact him now.
And,
I put in reports all the time, and we just had somebody putting some stuff on our website. So we just take it a lot more seriously,
yeah,
and then the feds also had some, dystopian kind of language that they were putting out, specifically the executive order that targets the Smithsonian, the Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, has extremely troubling language in it.
right,
Um, but this administration is like whack-a-mole. It's they're currently not that focused on culture and the arts. They might be again,
right,
right
right.
now they've moved on.
Right. Well, and actually, I would say this is a good place for me to just ask you to explain this a little bit. When I
Mhm.
talked to you as a pre-interview, I was assuming everything was kind of like it was last year with all the threats
Mhm.
and so on.
Mhm.
And you told me, no, actually, the threats kind of stopped,
Yeah.
and that your visitor numbers have gone up. Can you talk a little bit about that, like what the situation is now?
Yeah, we saw record visitation in March. Our
Wow.
visitation is rising. And that's not the case for other, as I've heard. I haven't seen hard numbers, but I have heard that the other museums that are close to us are not seeing an increase in visitation. They're seeing numbers go down.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure exactly what to make of that. But things are going fine. And I think, the point is we kind of fly under the radar and have for a long time.
Hmm.
So, it's good for us if like the focus of the administration is not specifically on slavery and how it's discussed, which it was for a while. I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, for
the
sure.
lady from The Biggest Loser, Jillian Michaels, was on TV talking about how the Smithsonian talks about slavery too much. Like we were in a weird dystopian version of reality. So when that's happening, then places like Whitney get a lot of attention. One thing that I put my board on notice of is that the Heritage Foundation has started grading historic sites. So they're sending secret shoppers to historic sites all over the country, and then they're putting on their website like what they did, and we would get a bad grade from them, obviously, and there's no question from that, but which would be like in some ways good PR for us, but also I don't want it. I don't want anybody who's into the Heritage Foundation to even be aware of what's
Sure.
going on, because more attention is more hate for us.
Yeah. So I have one more question. I see and I know that there are a lot of good questions people have for you. But I have to ask, I have an obligatory direction we should go just very briefly, which is I'm wondering if you could turn to your experience with Widen the Circle,
Mhm.
because it does connect to your work. Before you came to Germany with us, you had been thinking about Germany for a while. Can
Mhm.
you talk a little bit about that? And then can we talk a little bit about, one or two particular moments that stuck with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to do memory work in the United States and not be thinking about Germany and thinking eventually you got to go.
Right, sure.
It's the comparison everyone makes always, and I had wanted to see it for myself for a long time in order to try to understand the difference in memory culture. So it was really meaningful for me to be able to see it. And I think the thing that I was sort of I was overwhelmed by the number of memorials, like
Sure.
how memorialization was incorporated into everyday life. And I don't, I'm of many minds about it.
Sure.
So I don't know how I feel about it really. I could see there were instances where I thought like, when I saw the memorial that Zabed's students had built, and I thought that was such a beautiful
And this is the
memorial.
informal memorial that one of our awardee students have done in a neighborhood of Berlin where they've got across from their school, there's a site where all these deportations happen. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, just giving the little.
Yes, thank you. And I remember when we were standing there, there was somebody who was like walking through because he was just like on his way to work. And I thought, huh, you're just passing this every day. And I kind of liked how it was incorporated in everyday life.
Sure,
And especially I appreciate that even here. We have very few memorials, but when we do have them, I like being able to see them so that it's just part of life. I'm not going there on purpose. I had sort of the opposite reaction to in Berlin, the memorial for the murdered Jews of Europe,
sure,
which I thought was really impactful, and I had an incredible experience as a visitor to that memorial.
sure.
But I saw people eating lunch on the
Yep,
stones, and I
on the stones.
saw
Yep.
like influencers taking selfies and things like that. And I was like, I don't know how I feel about, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
of course, of course.
everything. So
Can I jump forward just a bit?
yeah,
Because I know you had a strong reaction when you went to the House of the Wannsee Conference,
yeah.
which I'll just say is the site of the conference where the Nazis agreed on the final solution, the extermination of the Jews. Okay, now we know what it is. Tell me what your experience was like.
Yeah, that site I found the most like a plantation to me. It felt very,
Like the plantation.
I could
Whoops.
easily kind of
Keep going, keep
map
going. So
it.
it felt like a plantation to you. Go ahead.
Yeah, because it's this thing that plantations do, right? It is this terrible place. It's a site of trauma. A lot of terrible things happened in this place, and yet it is a beautiful home. It's in a gorgeous neighborhood, and it's easy to be there and be distracted by all of the beauty and forget what happened in the place.
Right.
And I think that happens on plantations quite a bit. Um,
Okay.
and, and it was really important for me to see the original document, the like minutes of the meeting where they've decided the final solution. I didn't know such a document. I'd never seen that before. And I think that we try to do that at Whitney too, to show the original documents, because I think it's shocking for people to see an actual document that uses this language. It's cut and dry, it's black and white, it's easy to understand what it means. There's
Right.
no ambiguity there.
Yeah. Okay. I have more questions, but I'm going to stop now because I've been told we have so many questions that we should definitely go to I want to make sure people have a chance to ask them. And let me just tell people who are with us today, uh, we will pause maybe briefly at the end of the hour at around 2 o'clock, 2 o'clock my time, at 1 o'clock Ashley's time. Uh, Ashley, if it's okay, if we have more questions, can we go beyond that for those who can stick around and ask a few more questions? Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So hold on 1 second. Let me just get the question list up. There we go. And let me just dive into it. Alan asks, what is your feeling on using the word plantation? It may be controversial in certain circles, or is it controversial these days?
I mean, plantation is what we are. I think like for me it's controversial if you're not using the word plantation.
Right.
And I see that happen quite a bit where, there's a major plantation that's about 30 minutes away from us that was home to 750 enslaved people that
Hmm.
they don't talk about slavery, and they've branded themselves as Homus House and Gardens,
Oh,
to
wow.
completely excising the word plantation. Personally, I'd like to see Monticello be called Monticello Plantation and Mount
Right. So,
Vernon be called Mount Vernon Plantation, because
got
I
it.
think that it's a way to minimize the reality of what happened there.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. It's amazing how one word can make that difference.
Mhm.
I have several questions here. I had one from Stephen and one from Andrew about how you get funding, who funds your work, how are you able to do the maintenance and build these artwork, get these artworks, and so on. Somebody else asked, do you receive state grants, and how have those been affected? Anyway, so just give us a broad scope. How
Uh,
does this work?
Yeah, the three federal grants we had were really outliers. We don't get government funding, which is good because right now the government gets to tell people what to say if they get government funding, and they can't do that to us.
Right.
The state and specifically our current governor actually actively dislikes us. So that's fun. So we're not going to get any money from them. Um, we are mostly supported by earned revenue. So it costs money to visit the museum. We also have a gift shop, which has a separate like mission statement and a focus.
Hmm.
Our gift shop focuses on Black owned businesses and fair trade. We don't sell anything that's made outside of the United States unless it's fair trade. We have a preference for union labor. So we try
Yeah.
to like emphasize themes within the gift shop. So those things bring in kind of the base level of our revenue. We also do get donations and grants from private foundations and individuals. And to start the museum is a different that was our founder self-funded it. He put $10 million into the restoration and creation of the museum and then donated it.
Right. So basically, he bought the site, he
Mm-hmm.
spent the money to renovate and so on, and then
Mm-hmm.
turned it over to the nonprofit that now runs it.
Yeah.
Yeah, got it. That's serious stuff.
Yeah.
Um, do you encounter actions trying to hijack your narrative and try to erase your remembrance work? This is from Zoltan.
No, not really. I just heard a friend of mine went on a tour of another plantation recently, like last week. And she told me something that I've heard many times, which is that when the topic of Whitney came up, the tour guide at that museum said, "Oh, they're just lying." And, that's common. People say that. People who don't like us say that all the time. They'll say that the people who are selling tours in the French Quarter, they all say that, right? And they're saying that because they're uncomfortable with what we're saying, which is true, right? And it just kind of doesn't bother me
Got it.
because we have the truth on our side and we're going to be consistent and keep doing the thing that we do and do it well. And we
Okay.
are the only plantation that's currently open, not only that has this focus, but that is fully nonprofit and that also employs professional historians. We have multiple professional historians. So, we're doing things the right way, and I have no worries about detractors.
No, that makes sense. And then a follow-up question that's actually kind of similar. Johanna mentions that she visited the Whitney and thanks you and your colleagues. She asks, why are there not more sites like Whitney? And do you know of any more that are in development? Now, you answered that a little bit already, but maybe there's more to unpack there.
Yeah, there's a few sites. I would say like there's not really any place that's doing what we're doing exactly to the degree that we're doing it. But there are other sites that have a focus on slavery and they've opened more recently.
Okay.
So there's a site in South Carolina outside of Charleston called
Hmm.
McLeod Plantation, which has done very good work and also employs descendants. Um, the National Trust has recently changed the interpretation of a Louisiana site called Shadows on the Teche. So that's kind of in progress right
Okay.
now. Um, some of the presidential sites have done really good work, but they still have to talk about the president who owned the plantation,
Right.
obviously. You
Right.
can't do Monticello without Jefferson.
Right.
Um, and so they have to be a little bit different. And then Joy, who is, in the current cohort, she
So
and
yeah, hold on. Joy Banner, who is a
yeah,
current member of our current cohort that we're just starting out now. Go ahead.
yeah, good friend, neighbor, former employee of Whitney. She and her sister founded the Descendants Project a few years ago, and they mostly do advocacy work, but they've also bought a plantation, which will become a site where they talk about some of these
Gotcha.
themes,
Gotcha. Okay. So there are some around, but I guess I'm just struck by you didn't say there are 20 of them or 30 of them. You just named, like four or five,
Yeah, there's
basically.
not that
Yeah.
many.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then one more question. Andrew asked, how do you teach what happened during the approximately 100 years of Jim Crow? I don't know if that's the right number, but during the years of Jim Crow, which has similarities and differences from slavery. Is that something that's talked about on your site? And if so, how do you do it?
Yeah, this is actually my whole focus. So I will not go crazy on this answer because it's the thing I care most about. But my research is entirely on the post-slavery period. I've done a lot of oral histories with people who used to live on the plantation, who were born on the
Sure.
plantation. I am currently working on opening another building as a site on the tour, which is the plantation store, which was built after slavery during the Jim Crow period. And it's going to be a site that talks about the 20th century, and it's going to include oral histories. So we really want to bring this story up to the present day. It's currently, we talk about that on the tour now, but we're trying to do more of that. Eventually, what
Sure.
I'd love to see is a separate tour that's a Jim Crow tour, because I think the Jim Crow plantation is a totally different beast, and has very important history that's understudied.
Yeah. And it just seems like you have so intentionally used physical sites, pieces of artwork, and so on to kind of tell pieces of the story you already tell. It would
Mhm.
make sense that you would want to use, similar-ish techniques in, adding that part of the story as well. Yeah, cool. Steve asks, what is shown on the low wall near the Coming Home statue at the Field of Angels site?
Oh,
Names and photos?
yeah. So those are that's the data that's from the sacramental records. So
Mm-hmm.
it has their funeral records. It has the date of death, the name of the child, the age of the child, and the name of the mother. Are
Got it.
and that data is just repeated.
Now, my understanding is on the, I don't have the right name here, but the Wall of Honor. Did I get that right? You have those are for adults essentially. Well, I
Mm,
guess it could be either adult or
everyone.
not.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
basically, names, date of birth. My understanding is for some of them, you have like a place of birth because there's a number there who were, you know, were enslaved in Africa or the Caribbean or someplace. Is that right?
Yeah, the earliest records include, no, it's a little imprecise, but it does include ethnicities for a lot of people. So in some
Got it.
cases, that allows us to kind of understand where they're from, although that could be a little bit of a moving target. But yeah.
Yep. Sure.
Mhm.
Uh, and Awele, who is part of our 2026 fellowship cohort, who must be on, which is great, asks if you ever host retreats at the Whitney.
I I wish I could do more. I mean, yes, I have, but we don't have any like interior space. This is our
Yeah,
problem.
yeah. That,
So
that, that, would, that would make it hard.
yeah, I have had like meetings and things there, but basically the only interior space that you can use is the church. So that's kind of our programming space, and it's pews, because
Yeah,
it's a church. So
yeah. Okay,
um,
so it
yeah,
hasn't been part of your programming. I see that. All
yeah.
right, I'm going to pause for a second, especially if there's anybody who needs to leave at the top of the hour, and just I'm going to pause here and thank you, Ashley. Then we'll stick on for a little longer. So thank you for all of your questions and thoughts, and Ashley, thank you for giving us a kind of this window into your work. I'm just going to put on my executive director's hat very briefly and say, Widen the Circle raises money to support our work. I would be really grateful for those who are on this call if you would consider investing in our work, and if you're interested in doing so, please visit our website, widenthecircle.org. That's widenthecircle.org. And I also encourage people who are curious about what we're doing just to go there as well. Um, and the other thing that we look for is people who can help widen our circle. So if you know people who you think would be interested in what we do, please pass information on to them, or we'll make sure the next time you get, or maybe the next time we get an invitation to you about an event, feel free to share that around. Okay, thanks again to Ashley and to all of you for joining. Let's see if there are a few more questions now. Uh, um, and let me just open up the chat and double check there's nothing else I missed. Uh, oh, yeah. Somebody suggests that there's some similarities in some of the things you're doing to stumbling stones, kind of the idea of marking
Yeah.
things.
Hmm.
Can I ask is that something you were familiar with before you came to Germany? And
Yeah.
how do you think it relates?
Yeah, there's somebody actually in the US who's trying to do that with slavery. I think it's infinitely more difficult because,
It
like,
is, and just to be honest, the person who kind of runs the program that does that is in
uh,
our cohort this year.
oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I think it's like I've thought about this because it's like in the US, you'll have like it's a Walmart and there were 300 people enslaved. You know what I mean? This is the situation that we've got because it's like rural, like
Right.
it's
And
not just.
you mean because there's so much, so limited records? Is that what you mean? Or
No, I
are
mean
you saying
because
something?
like I mean yes, there's limited records, but I also mean plantations were in rural spaces, which
Hmm.
by and large have been like plastered over in a lot of the South
Ah, okay.
with like development. So, you could be like on a highway and that used to be a plantation. So I thought a lot about like how would you do it? It's a super interesting thing. And I think it would work really well in a place like New Orleans, but I've wondered how do you do it in Mississippi? But anyways, um,
It's tricky. I hear what you're saying. Yeah, that's hard.
yeah, yeah. I actually like I had first heard about that in Berlin, and this was like 10 years ago. And my first reaction was like, I was like, we should put it here. We should put a marker on every single building where enslaved people lived in New Orleans. So I'm on board. I think like I think it's really interesting though, like the experience of actually seeing it, because I had known about it a long time and thought it was a very cool idea. And then actually seeing it again, I'm of many minds of it.
Hmm.
The seeing the real names I thought was really impactful, but then like I'm literally walking on them. And I wasn't sure if I liked that or not.
How you felt about that?
Yeah.
Sure, sure. That's a
Yeah.
very controversial piece of it.
Yeah.
Uh, I guess I'm always struck by something that I is tricky to figure out of the analogy, which is one of the things that makes stumbling stones powerful to me is that it's decentralized in the way that the decisions are made of where to put them. Right. In other
Mm,
words, people in the place have to decide they really want to do it, and
right.
they can't just say, "Oh, I want to do it. Here's my money." There's a whole bunch of steps you have to go through,
Interesting. Yeah.
and the question is, here in the United States, could you get a decentralized effort where people say, I want to memorialize people who were near me, as opposed to like a top-down project that was basically just saying, I want to put signs in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
And
I
I'm
don't,
not saying that latter is bad. I'm just saying one of the things that makes it powerful in Germany is to know it's possible to know 100 different people who have done stumbling stone projects that are all totally different in different parts of the
yeah.
country.
Well, and I'm currently working on this because we're redoing the Wall of Honor. So I'm intimately aware of how difficult it is to answer the question, who was enslaved here? So we're trying to do this with Whitney, and that seems like maybe it's an easy question to answer, but it's not because there was one property and then, the son buys next door, but then that becomes part of the same property. And then we've sold it and then we get it back. And then actually we have this part over here and that gets brought in. So we're dealing with like five different pieces of land that eventually become Whitney Plantation that
Right.
have multiple successions. And so we are completely overwhelmed with trying to answer this question just with this site. It's incredibly difficult. And we still won't get everybody because not everybody's names were written down.
Yeah. So I have one additional question from Dan, but before I ask his question, I did want to ask you a key question that's highly self-serving,
Mm.
which is how would you consider maybe talking a little bit about the question about what to do, design for this wall, how to change it, and what to do as a roundtable with our fellows?
Ha-
I
Wait,
mean, meaning to talk about the challenge with our fellows, just so they can hear about kind of what you're struggling with and so on.
yeah. Yeah. So part of it is this like question of like who's actually going on the wall. This is
Yeah,
our
sure, sure.
problem. Um,
But what I meant is, could we do it maybe in the fall? Invite you
yeah,
in as a guest, and you can just describe kind of where your thought process is.
yeah, and maybe I will have a list by then. I thought I was going to be done by June, and we keep looking and finding more because yeah, I would be happy to because one of the other problems is that like these records are in three different languages,
Hmm.
and we're trying to lay eyes on every single original document to try to get and it's a nightmare. It's
Yeah,
difficult. It's good work though. It's the most exciting work I've ever done in my life. I'm really energized by it. It's just really hard.
got it. So, a question from I think I've got this right, Dan. You've conveyed the power of experiencing this history at a physical site. Have you thought about whether and how to reach people on digital media and allow them to experience it virtually? Is there an upside and a downside to that?
Yeah, we actually have a virtual tour and we have not figured out what to do with it. This is something that like I don't know. This is a constant.
And when you say what to do, yeah, tell us more.
Yeah, like how do you uh who wants it and why and how do you deliver it? Is it something that lives on the internet and anyone can access it anytime or is it behind a paywall? Is it used for only like classrooms who want to do a virtual visit? Do we have a live interpreter helping them? We just recently we thought it was kind of done, but then we decided to pull everything off because some of the stuff that ended up in the virtual tour is like an interactive experience was not accurate. So we pulled it all off.
Oh,
We're
wow.
making it align with our audio tour. So we've incorporated like the audio stops throughout the virtual experience. There's a lot more we could do with it if we had somebody who was in charge of like handling it, but we're all kind of doing it in our spare time. So
Gotcha.
anyways, this is an ongoing current thing we're trying to figure out. But we do have a very cool virtual tour that was developed for us.
Wow.
So someday,
And it sounds like part of the question there is like, who's the audience and what's the purpose? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So we're sort of
Okay.
trying to pay attention to when we get requests, who are they and what are they asking for, so we can try to figure out how we release it to the public.
All right. Well, it seemed like an obvious thing before we asked the question, but now I know. Now that you've answered it, it sounds actually very complicated.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Let me just double check here. Uh, oh, since it is such a traumatic place, what was the process for creating spaces for contemplation at the plantation?
Yeah, so I mean, half of the site is actually memorials. So most of the visit is contemplative. And it used to be that the guided tour was the only way you could visit the site. And
Hmm.
so you would really spend with a group half of your time almost in silence, kind of reflecting and reading these memorials and things like that. One thing that we introduced the self-guided tour, which is an audio tour, a few years ago, and there were a lot of pain points that were the reason behind that. Number one is staffing. It was difficult to have enough people to give the tour. Number two was specifically second, like other language staffing, because we
Mm.
have a lot of international visitors and we never had tour guides who could speak languages. Our research director is happy to give a tour in French, but he has a different job. So,
Yeah.
this is available in 5 languages apart from English.
Right.
Um, and the other reason was a kind of visitor experience reason. So I was picking up on the fact that like certain visitors were really did not want to be walked through. They wanted to be able to kind of be on their own and
Really. Okay.
reflect and learn on their own. And people were reporting, some visitors were reporting that they felt rushed. Now it's an hour and a half tour that usually was an hour and 45. So you're not really being rushed. But I
Right.
was perceiving that what was happening was that they wanted to spend time over here, but the tour had to move on. So they felt rushed in that moment because they didn't get the
Sure.
effective time to be reflective. One of the first things that I noticed when we released the self guided experience and we had people on the grounds on their own for the first time was I found a mother with 2 of her kids sitting on a bench and they were just sitting there for a long time. And she was kind of talking to them in a way she wanted to talk to them to explain what they were, understanding on the tour. That was a real pain point for us. Like if you had a little kid, you couldn't really be with the tour and it's too much for the kid. So the mom would want to kind of run off and then she's missing it. So I think that having those 2 experiences allows us to have everything. So for the person who really wants that structured experience, they can. But for
Right.
the people who want to just like sit on the porch of the slave cabin by themselves and just like listen to the birds, they can do that too.
Got it. One final question I'm going to put it to you. Alan asks about how many visitors do you have a year?
This year, I'm expecting a little over 95,000.
And
Yeah,
is that a good year?
that's a good year. That's a good year. My record is 106,000, which was in 2019. But I was open 7 days a week and didn't really have any closures, only a few closures for holidays. So we are open probably 60 fewer days right now than we were in 2019. And we're almost hitting that record.
Oh,
So I feel
wow.
good.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. All right.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to wrap up with our final question. Our final
Okay.
question is going to come from Awele. Awele said, I visited a plantation near Washington, D.C. She said moons ago, that had live enactments. It brought to life some of the experiences of those who were enslaved there. I can't remember the name. I was wondering if has been a convening of such historical sites, and if so, what have you learned?
That might be Williamsburg is known to have historic Williamsburg is known to have had some interpretation. I okay, so I'll say this. I grew up from a live interpretation background, so this is kind
Sure.
of my history. I have not really wanted to delve into it too much at Whitney because I could see a lot of issues with it. I know people who do third person costumed interpretation of enslaved people.
Hmm.
Uh, as a freelancers and across, so I've talked to many of them, and it can be really great, and it can also create really tense interactions with visitors
Mm.
who feel compelled to say much worse things than they do to a person who's in modern day clothing.
Oh,
Um,
really?
And that's a
Wow.
pretty common experience. However, we have had people who have done, so I'll just say there's a difference between third person and first person costumed. So if you're first person costumed, you've taken on a character and
Right.
you are now that character. That's the type of interpretation my mother used to do. That
Mhm.
really does not, that can be really problematic for for somebody interpreting an enslaved person for obvious
Yeah.
reasons.
Yeah.
Everyone I know who does costumes does third person, which is to say, I am me, Ashley Rogers, and I am in a costume, and I'm explaining to you the mechanics of all of this stuff.
Yeah.
We have had people on site who have done that who are well known in the field. Michael Twitty has cooked in our kitchen.
Sure. Has Joe McGill slept in the?
Bill McGill has been there and brought
Yeah.
a couple
Okay.
of friends who've done, interpretation, and it was fantastic. As an event that we held, there was a lot. There was a lot of benefit to some of that, and I think in particular on all of those occasions we had kind of like targeted audiences, so they sort of knew how to engage. I think it would be difficult for as an everyday type of situation.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. Ashley, thank you so much. This was fabulous. Thank you for sticking around for an extra few minutes. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and look for more information from us and for future events as we have a new cohort of members of our fellowship program, and I'm sure we'll have events and hear from them in the fall. Ashley, thank you. This was great.
Thank
Really,
you
thank
so
you.
much.
You bet. Bye bye, everyone.